Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for showing up to our session that we termed the role of plant-based foods in food system transformation. Um, my name is Tawanda Mujingi. I am the Director for International Programs within the Plant-Based Foods Association and Plant-Based Foods Institute uh, based in the US. And today we have the privilege of being here at COP28 within the Food for Climate Pavilion, um, just to share some insights into the work that we do. Um, so Plant-Based Foods Association is a trade association in the US that represent companies that are working, making plant-based products in the US. And our work is around policy advocacy, engaging policymakers to create an enabling environment where companies can make these products and consumers can have access to these products. And some of our work is around fighting labeling restrictions around plant-based products in the US. And then with the Plant-Based Foods Institute, we work mostly to do research. It's a nonprofit entity around food system transformation, and we collaborate with other trade associations in the world. So we have work globally around labeling restrictions, and we have several members that we are part of a group, the International Working Group, where we do collaborative work. So one of our work that we did was conducting a large survey in 7 countries, just to kind of get clarity around is there consumer confusion around plant-based foods? Because the narrative has been that the use of animal descriptors is confusing consumers. So you can't call plant-based milk in certain markets. You can't call a plant-based burger a burger in certain markets. So we did a global survey in 7 countries, um, the UK, France, Italy, Turkey, India, South Africa, and Chile. And so the criteria for these people that were surveyed had to live in these countries, and they had to be 18 years of age, and they must at least do half the grocery shopping within their household, and they should at least consume plant-based foods at least once a year. And we had a sample size of about 500 people in each of those markets. So these are some of the key findings that we found from this global research. And we found that among those who consume plant-based foods, the level of consumption is increasing, and they are commonly consumed alongside animal-based products. And we found that plant-based foods are well liked across markets, with India showing the highest likability and the fastest growth. And European markets had lower likability, seemingly resulting in lower consumption. The top plant-based purchases were the yogurt, the milk, and the meat. And in Turkey, the condiments and the sauces were also quite popular. We also found that lower prices would enhance plant-based foods accessibility, particularly in markets with lower overall consumption, especially in France, Italy, and the UK. This is further reinforced as Europeans are less inclined to pay more for plant-based products. So, but price we found is not a big barrier in markets like India. And we also found that consumers are motivated to consume plant-based foods due to their perception as healthier products, and them being and them being better for the environment. So then the health and nutrition messages sticks more than the environmental message. We also saw that taste is also a big driver in markets like Chile, in India, in South Africa, and in Italy. Um, So statements emphasizing nutritional benefits are most likely to lead to increased purchases of plant-based products. So consumers also generally prefer separate sections within the supermarkets that are dedicated to plant-based products instead of integrating them. But they're also more likely to have them adjacent to each other. And one of the biggest finding was that the use of animal descriptors for, for plant-based products are more helpful, particularly in South Africa. And plant-based labeling is generally not confusing, except for eggs. There was a lot of confusion around the use of the term for eggs. So these designs together may the with the optional labeling combination. So consumers actually expect plant-based foods to offer similar in terms of nutrition. We found that consumers do not expect plant-based products to give them the same nutrition as animal-based products. Um, they don't expect nutritional equivalency. So, so it's not a direct replacement that they're expecting, but they're expecting different nutritional experiences. So, the International Plant-Based Working Group currently has these countries as members. Plant-Based Foods Association, representing the US, Plant-Based Foods of China, the European Alliance for Plant-Based Foods, the Plant-Based Food Alliance in the UK, the Turkish Plant-Based Foods Association, and the newly formed Plant-Based Foods Association of South Africa, and the European Association for Plant-Based Foods, and the Mexican Association. We also have one that's just been formed in Chile, and another one that just joined us from Australia and New Zealand. Unfortunately, we don't have their logos here with us today. So this is a global network of organizations that are promoting plant-based foods. So today we're going to talk about some of the challenges for the plant-based food industry. There's been an effort to kind of restrict what you can call plant-based foods. Uh, so these are the countries where there are severe restrictions in the US, in the UK, in South Africa, and France and Italy, in the EU, in other countries, in Turkey, Chile. So this, we believe, are efforts that are designed to hinder the growth of plant-based foods and to create more confusion for consumers so that they have less access to plant-based foods. So what I'm going to do is to shift gears and get into a discussion with my colleague here about some of these labeling restrictions in a particular market. So I'd like to transition and ask my colleague to introduce himself and where he's coming from.
Thanks, Tawanda. My name is Donovan Will. I am the country director for ProVeg South Africa and one of the co-founders of the newly formed Plant-Based Food Association for South Africa. And we were plunged into this labeling regulations debate last year, where our government tried to ban words like burger.
Yes, yes. So, Donovan, before we go deeper, can you briefly talk about plant-based foods in general in South Africa, the type of products, the companies, and the consumer response to date? What's the scenario right now?
Yeah, so a lot of people would be very surprised to see how advanced it is in South Africa. Um, I was very surprised when I traveled to Europe, thinking that it would be a lot more advanced here than it is in South Africa. But the reality is, we have meat alternatives and milk alternatives are ubiquitous. We have them in thousands of stores. Even in the small rural areas, you will find soy milk and at least one of the brands of meat replacements, Fries, the Fry Family Food Co. They've been around for over 30 years. They are international now. but I think a lot of people in South Africa take them for granted that you can go to a small farm town and find in a small independent retailer, you'll find a box of chicken style nuggets or plant-based Viennas. So it is there in the major cities. It's obviously a lot bigger, and we do have the emergence of 100% vegan restaurants in Johannesburg and Cape Town, and a couple of them in Durban. So it's definitely growing, and I think in terms of African continent, it's really big. And then on the other side, we often talk about these alternative products, but when we look at whole food plant-based, it's a really big thing in South Africa. A lot of people who are living in the poorer communities are eating whole food plant-based by default because of the economic reality. In South Africa, I think the last number I saw was 53% of the population is living below the poverty line. And a few years ago, our government put out a report on how do we feed the masses. The answer was samp, beans, and spinach. A grain, beans and legumes, and leafy greens, and other vegetables that are relatively easy to grow. So the stats are really hard to find on that. When we speak to big research agencies who are doing the research into what are people eating, they're usually doing that research on behalf of big food companies or retailers. So the starting point is, well, we've excluded the 50% of South Africans who are living under the poverty line. So this research we're going to show you now doesn't include people who are not economically active. It doesn't include any people who are subsistence farmers that aren't in some sort of formal um, there are studies do sometimes include certain areas where there's subsistence farming happening, and they try and aggregate that and use an algorithm. But then you go, okay, but what about people who are living in suburbs who are growing their own vegetables, which is definitely happening, and that's all excluded. So to know exactly where we are in terms of market sizing or what everyone's doing, it's very difficult to see. The best stats we've seen in terms of actual consumption is that around about 0 point something percent are plant-based or vegan, um, 2 or 3% vegetarian. And the flexitarian number really ranges because most of the studies have different definitions of what flexitarian is, but anywhere from 10 to about 30 or 40% would be a normal result to get. Some of the retailers are much higher because they attract a much higher LSM. So our wealthiest retailer, they suggest that 80% of the consumers are flexitarian actively at least once a week, replacing a meat product for a vegetarian, which is
Yeah.
which is obviously very promising.
So that's quite encouraging. I didn't have that broad understanding of plant-based food in South Africa. It seems like a growing
Yeah.
in the vibrant scenes. So with that, I'm sure there are a couple of challenges, obviously, for the industry. So can you briefly talk about the government's response in terms of regulations for plant-based foods? How that what's happening? Can you tell us briefly what the government
So
has done so
yeah,
far?
I can tell you that for the we founded ProVeg South Africa in 2018.
Yeah.
And when I started ProVeg, I thought, okay, let's reach out to all the government departments that are in some way related to food or who could help with plant-based food. And it was practically impossible to get a meeting with anyone. No one was interested in plant-based food. And that has been the case up until last year, where suddenly plant-based food was thrown into the limelight because of government efforts to restrict the labeling. And it was really interesting. A year before, we had seen the rumblings from the meat industry, from the Processed Meat Association, saying we want to regulate this. There were no regulations at the time, so a communication came out asking stakeholders, do we want new regulations? And even from my side, I think it is important that the industry is regulated. And at the moment, you can call something plant-based bacon, and it can be a piece of rubbery tempeh that has no, it doesn't look in or taste in any way like bacon, and that to me is frustrating. It's not good for us either. So there has to be some regulation on what we call things and how we label things. And so we actually saw it as a promising step. About 85% of respondents to that question said, yes, we should. 100% of the meat industry players said we need new regulations. So in April last year, the department said, we're going to look into new regulations. And then, huge surprise, in June, we get a communication saying that according to 2019 processed meat regulations, plant-based food companies can't use words like burger, nugget, sausage, and we're going to start seizing products like next week. And a lot of people said to me, I was actually in Germany at the time. I thought it was a joke at first, thought it was a friend punking me because he knew how much pressure I was under. Um, After flying back to South Africa, a lot of people thought that this wouldn't happen. It actually already had happened. About a month before, the importers of Just Egg had got notified that you can't have egg on your label for a plant-based egg. And they found out about that from the retailer that was stocking it before they actually found out about it from the government, because the government had gone to the retailer and said this is illegal, and the retailer had simply removed the product from shelf immediately, no questions asked. So there wasn't even an ability to have that fight. So when we saw that these directives were going out banning um, burgers and nuggets, we knew it was serious, and it wouldn't be a case of the government going in and enacting this. It would just be an email to the retailers, and the retailers would remove the products. So that was it was a lot different to what's happening in most of the other countries where they're trying to enact new regulations. This was existing regulation. The regulation in the scope section 2.2c said these regulations do not apply to vegetarian or plant-based products that contain no meat, and they still try to do that. Essentially, we worked with the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa um, to sue the government to stop that, and over a year later, it's still basically sitting in the courts. Seizures can't happen. There's no actual ruling of where we stand. So as an association, we're hoping to work with them on new regulations.
Yeah. Oh, this is fascinating that the government can actually just do whatever they want without even consulting the relevant stakeholders.
Well, what was most interesting about it is they said they had consulted us in 2019 when they made the processed meat regulations. But we all saw the processed meat regulations didn't apply to us, so we weren't involved. And interestingly, the government has the power, and then the second most powerful group of people is the retailers, because the retailers will just do whatever the government tells them to some degree. And we saw that while we were trying to actively oppose these regulations, which were, I mean, there may be some argument around some meat terms, but the idea that the word burger is a meat term is ludicrous. One of our largest retailers, like a month later, just went and changed the names of all of their plant-based options. So if you go into Woolworths, burgers are now called rounds, sausages are now called links, um, nuggets are now called bites, and some of it is confusing. I've had people saying, "What's happened with Beyond sausages?" And so they're there, and we're looking online for them, can't find them. Okay, you have to look up Beyond links. Which the word link, I'm not quite sure where that. I think that because when you make sausages, they're linked together, but it just shows that the retailers don't care either. And I think for them, it's the case that they believe that people are going to buy it regardless.
Yeah,
And we're waiting to see what happens with new sales in the category.
yeah, yeah. No, that's quite interesting that there were these funny terms now for plant-based foods that are even, I think, in my opinion, creates more confusion. Um,
Yeah,
than
it's definitely confusing people,
yes,
and it would be. I think it would be better if it was funnier. Think if you had some brands who came out with really ridiculous names for their products and used that as a PR stunt, that would be good. But when it's just something like a link or a round, and it's again those terms are not particularly appealing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, you mentioned some of the work that ProVeg International has done in South Africa. So what has been the response from the plant-based food industry uh, before the regulations were in place and afterwards? What has been happening and what happened? Where do we stand right now in terms
Yeah.
from an industry perspective?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think it's actually there's been some positives. Obviously, I don't want to say that this whole thing was positive. It caused a lot of chaos. There were a couple of companies who've gone out of business because of it. The company that bought that was bringing Beyond Meat in, they went out of business, and a big part of it was the fact that for a while they were too scared to bring Beyond Meat in. You can't bring in a shipment of product that's name is Beyond Meat because the actual
Yeah,
the company's name would have to change.
yeah,
Essentially, that retailer who changed the names of all their products, they worked directly with Beyond, and they did actually change the name. So now Beyond sausages are called Beyond Links. Beyond they actually relabeled it for the retailer. The positive was that it was twofold. The one was that it brought an industry together.
yeah,
Before that, Probit had been working for 4 years to try and unify a movement or unify the. I mean, the sector, we had never been in meetings with more than two or three players in the plant-based space.
Yeah.
Immediately after I took the communication seriously, we started reaching out to the partners that we were working with, and within, I think it was 4 days, we had a letter to send to the department signed by 52 stakeholders in the
Yeah.
plant-based space.
Yeah.
And these are serious stakeholders. Unilever was in there, Burger King was in there. So it wasn't mom and pop stores making,
Yeah.
Fava meringues or something on the weekend. It was big food companies, and
Yeah.
the department completely ignored it. It became very obvious that we needed to have some sort of platform or mechanism through which the plant-based industry could have discussions, and there just wasn't one. So that was a big positive for ProVeg that because we had already been engaging with a lot of the stakeholders, and those stakeholders hadn't been engaging with each other.
Yeah.
We were able to bring that together quite quickly, and it showed people that there was some benefit of working together.
Yeah.
And then the other one was press. We've never got so much positive press for the plant-based food industry. In general, in the media, plant-based food and vegan lifestyles are presented as being very crazy. And very often the media will go out of their way to find people who meet that stereotype.
Yeah.
And being in interviews and even one debate with government departments, where the government department is saying, the presenters asking, what evidence do we have that people are being misled? And the response is, well, what evidence do you have that they haven't been misled?
Yeah.
And it is this idea that people are being confused about the word veggie burger. It
Yeah.
really got the public on our side. And the narrative around why is the government so scared of this? Why is the meat industry so scared of it? Actually got people to stop laughing at us and take us seriously. So as much as I wish it had never happened,
Yes.
there has been some positives, and the Plant-Based Food Association of South Africa is a result of this. So a result of those conversations, realizing that you need some sort of steering committee.
Yeah.
It's difficult because you have these you want to try and have a meeting for the plant-based food industry. That means having, Burger King coming and talking about their new veggie range, and then having, groups of very passionate vegans who want to have their voices heard.
Yeah.
How do you set something up? And when you're pro-veg and you work with both of these, or both, you work with the whole spectrum, and you're supposed to be trying to have a meeting, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So to have a separate organization whose mandate is for plant-based food sector, this has got nothing to do with making sure that every voice is heard. This is to make sure that the voices of the people who are making the products and selling the products are heard. So that's been amazing. And then because of that, being connected with organizations like PBFI and the working group has really made a difference to how seriously people are taking this opportunity to work together.
Yeah.
So there has been some positives that come out of it, although everyone is still quite scared of what happens next.
Yes. So what do you think the Plant-Based Foods Association of South Africa needs to do? What are some of the immediate steps, and what kind of impact do you hope to achieve in the coming year?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is just getting the alliance really established. We have a founding group, and that contains the largest manufacturer of foods fries, and then the COO of the company that was bringing in Beyond Meat and Oatly and File all of the big international brands, and then a whole lot of lawyers, because we realized that was really important. And so getting the other 50 to 100 stakeholders that we've been working together with to actually meet together, agree on exactly what it is that we're doing, and hopefully for them to give us some membership fees so we have funding. That's really important. And the first thing that we will be working on is these regulations. And so at the moment, the whole thing is sitting in the court. The court has basically said to the government, you guys need to go and do a landscape analysis. You guys have to have a really good reason to try and ban these products. You need to really assess what the impact is going to be. And not much has happened there. So we are hoping that we will just go straight to the process of creating these new regulations that they said that they would work. We do think that is happening in the background already without us. And that's part of the reason that this association is so important, is to have a body that can be a seat at the table. Because at the moment there is no one who's standing up to do that. And then in the individual capacities, you don't have the same sway as the meat lobby or the processed meat organizations. So what our hope is that we will create a set of industry guidelines, self-regulated industry guidelines,
Yeah.
that would be the building blocks of a larger regulation.
Yeah.
So that when the government does say, okay, we're going to start making new regulations,
Yeah.
we have something that we can present to them based on some of the great work that's been done by some of the other alliances around the world.
Yeah. So I read the news recently that because of avian flu, the price of eggs in South Africa went really high, or there were no eggs at all. Also, in the past few years, foot and mouth disease has been rampant in South Africa. So there's been, this um, kind of livestock diseases
Yeah.
that are creating shortages on the market. So do you think that's an opening for the plant-based foods? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you would really think that it would be. You would really think that, okay, let's look at this food system that keeps failing in so many ways. We can add a huge meat labeling scandal a few years ago where we were finding waterbuck and donkey in the beef aisle.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, a big listeriosis outbreak where quite a few people actually died. And you would think that there would be some conversation around there. But the narrative is never about
Yeah.
an alternative. It's always about, are the governments not doing their job properly, or we need the government to spend more money on you know better facilities for chickens, or better facilities, or we need to be paying for vaccines.
Yeah.
So the discussion is never around anything other than what is the government going to do
Yeah.
to protect the people so that we can keep getting more chicken.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where this cognitive dissonance is so strong that there were people in our government who were pushing for the VAT on chicken to be scrapped. And the rationale was that KFC was running out of chicken and that South Africans weren't going to be able to get enough protein if KFC is running out of chicken. And you read those reports and you think that it's kind of like, okay, we're using KFC as an example, like there's a chicken shortage. No, they were literally like, people need to be able to have access to KFC.
Yeah.
Make sure that we have like a stable routine base in South Africa. So that discussion it's almost hilarious. It would be funny if it wasn't so sad. So we've been really trying to change the narrative and have discussions around, if the price of eggs is going up,
Yeah.
the government should be educating people that you can get all the protein you need from beans and legumes and whole grains and whatever. And we've been on in the media talking about the price per gram of protein from eggs versus legumes, and it's still the case that it is cheaper to just eat legumes. And again, if people want the choice, they can choose whichever one they want. But the problem is, the narrative is to the average South African, many of whom are living below the poverty line, that if you are not able to give your family chicken or eggs, they're going to be malnourished. And to us, that is the narrative that needs to change. And unfortunately, even though it is a massive opportunity for the plant-based space, media is not picking up on it. The government doesn't care. We're not taking it very seriously. And I mean, we live in a country where the president is one of the biggest owners of cattle in his private capacity. So it's not super surprising. But there are opportunities, and I think that at some point, money does land up speaking. So at some point, where people really can't afford to eat eggs because they're too expensive, we're going to see the shift.
Well, you put a lot of work cut out for you in the coming year, and wish you all the best. Well, now I can go back to our audience and see if there are any questions to what's happening in South Africa or what the work. Yes.
I had a question regarding the lawsuit you talked about. And what I'm just thinking from a US perspective, I don't know how the government could have any legitimate legal claim to a basic word. It's not something patented or whatever. So that's what I was really wondering about the rule, when the ruling will come out on that. So
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm not a lawyer, and it's so strange that it's like an episode of Suits where the discussion is often not about the common sense reality of the situation. So one of the arguments um, that the government made to defend their action was that they hadn't. We were arguing against their decision, and legally, a decision is some. It's not just the common sense word decision. And their initial argument was, we didn't make a decision. We're simply enforcing previously agreed on regulations. So we had to basically go back and we had pointed out that those regulations don't apply, and they were just saying yes, they do. And so the courts had to basically decide if the regulations applied to us or not. And that wasn't the main focus in the beginning because we just had to change. They were just trying to change the argument to say the whole legal like action that has been taken is challenging a decision, and a decision was never made. That's as far as we need to go. And so that the ball was kicked down the road, the can was kicked down the road several times. And so we're sitting in a position where I don't know exactly where we're at the moment, other than that, luckily, the products can't be seized.
I know in the US, I don't know how many years ago it was the cattle industry that said, no, 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 you can't call that a burger. That's our word. And I don't remember how it turned out, but they were the ones that were suing the plant, whoever was making
Yeah.
something burger. But, I guess we are able to call burgers made out of plants a burger, so they must have lost.
It's really interesting, and I had some relatively friendly conversations with the plant-based meat, the Plant Processed Meat Association of South Africa. They were happy with the word burger, nugget, sausages, these general descriptors, and they were really worried about very specifically biltong and boerewors, which are two South African words that are very highly regulated, and that to some degree is a whole different conversation because those are protected words, and then you have words like frankfurter and salami or whatever. It was an interesting conversation because in South Africa, you like around the world, you can call bag of tuna noodles, you can call them beef flavor tuna noodles. So there's no worry with the word flavor. So I asked, can we call these things? Can I call this a beef flavored burger? And he said that's perfectly fine. So I said, okay, but if it has the same flavor and the same texture and the same usage and quite similar macro nutrition profile, what is wrong with the word style? What is what beef style or chicken style? As long as it's plant-based beef style, and I think the regulations that we would be pushing for is something like you need to make sure that it says that it's plant-based, so either plant-based or vegan or vegetarian, beef style, and then what it's made of, made with soy or made with, and I think like in Germany, that's where it is, and it's been like this for a long time. And he said, well, you can't because it's doesn't taste like it and it doesn't the texture is not the same and it's like you're so far off that we just can't do that. Have you tried the Beyond Burger? No. Would you try the Beyond Burger? I actually had some with me because I thought the conversation might go that way. And he was like, no, I said, I literally have some in the cooler box in the car. I'm not interested. So your argument is you're perfectly fine with us calling it beef flavor because it does have a similar flavor, but you think that we can't call it beef style because it doesn't look or taste similar. But I haven't tried it yet. So it's that thing of like, and again, I have a lot of sympathy for the industry, especially for the processed meat industry. They do have to pay a lot of money to be regulated and make sure that they're following these regulations. The reason that they're paying that money and having to be regulated is because of all of the outbreaks of listeriosis and other issues that they've had, and their products are intrinsically dangerous. So I think trying to say that we need a completely fair playing field, if your product is way more dangerous, you need more regulations. I agreed with this point that the plant-based food industry who are making processed products and putting them on shelves should also have regulations. The regulations they should be common sense regulations that protect consumers and aren't designed to protect existing businesses, which is clearly what's happening here.
Well, thank you. That was an interesting discussion. Well, we have come to the end of our chat about labeling restrictions. So we just closed an RFP yesterday. We had a grant, and we invited organizations across the world to apply for funding so they can kind of challenge existing labeling restrictions for plant-based foods in their countries. So we hope the awardees can start the work next year. we hope
And we hope we
there
want
will be
to.
funds for South Africa, and you can kind of proactively engage the government and stakeholders in this discussion so that South Africa is a huge market. People can enjoy plant-based foods and can benefit from it. And South Africa being a big country in sub-Saharan Africa can actually influence the neighboring countries to also create favorable environment. So we hope it's not a lot of money, but we hope it will make a significant impact in similar markets like in Italy and in France and in Chile, where there are concerted efforts to kind of restrict what plant-based companies can do. So thank you for the good work you're doing.
No, thank you, and the work that you're doing at the Institute. I think there's one of the things we really need to acknowledge is that when we look at the number of countries that do have these regulations, so other than the EU, it's actually quite small. So if we look in Africa, there's, as far as we know, there's only one country. There's 50 something countries in Africa. So if we can get ahead of it and we can draft common sense regulations that do protect consumers and do what regulations are meant to do, and we can start having the conversations with stakeholders in those countries, we can hopefully, in most of the cases, we can get ahead of it.
Yes. Yeah, there are a lot of efforts also internationally to kind of come up with a definition of plant-based foods. I know with ISO, there are current discussions around that. So that can also help countries that don't have the capacity to define some of these regulations can use the ISO definition. So there are still discussions. So far there are numerous proposals of what to call a plant-based foods and what it shouldn't be called. So we hope our efforts would also inspire the people who are negotiating for a plant-based definition for different countries. So we hope that that can help and advance the sector and the movement. Yeah. So thank you to the audience.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Whole conversation. Any questions?
Yes. Does a comment, yeah. Yes. Thank you.